If you freeze up when trying to speak a new language, you do not have a vocabulary problem. You have an activation problem.
Right. It's totally different.
Yeah, so picture this. You're sitting in a bustling cafe, maybe you're traveling, or I don't know, perhaps you're just in a meeting at work.
Or even just at a restaurant, you know?
Exactly. Someone turns to you, makes eye contact, smiles, and asks a relatively simple question in the language you're actively trying to learn. Let's say it's English.
Okay, setting the scene.
They ask the question, and suddenly time just stops. Like, you know the words. You've studied these exact words for a month.
You've got the flashcards?
Yes, you have flashcards. You've aced the quizzes on your phone. You can read them perfectly. But right now, in this exact high-pressure moment, your brain has completely and utterly frozen.
It's just a blank slate.
Totally blank.
Yeah.
There's this massive, agonizing, incredibly awkward pause. You're maintaining eye contact, you're smiling politely, but behind your eyes. Your brain is performing a desperate, exhausting sequence of mental gymnastics.
Just trying to assemble, like, a basic 5-word sentence.
Exactly.
It's a uniquely terrifying sensation, isn't it?
Oh, it's the worst.
The air in the room suddenly feels thick. You can almost hear the ticking clock in your own mind.
Tick, tick, tick.
You can see the micro-expressions on the other person's face as they wait for you to respond. It's a universal experience for anyone who has ever tried to acquire a second language.
And the cognitive toll it takes on you is profoundly draining.
It really is draining.
So if you're listening to this right now and you've ever felt that specific brand of panic, if you've ever felt like your conversational skills are stuck in thick mud because you're constantly obsessively translating everything in your head before you dare to speak well, you are exactly who we are talking to today.
Yeah, that's the target audience right there.
Today we are going on a mission. We are taking a deep dive into the underlying neuroscience, the cognitive psychology, and most importantly, the practical strategy of training your brain to think directly in a new language.
Right, because we want to figure out exactly why your brain deliberately holds your vocabulary hostage.
And how to break that translation habit for good.
And, we're not just going to talk about abstract linguistic theories today.
No vague advice here.
Right. No, just immerse yourself nonsense. The source material we're diving into is packed with incredibly pragmatic, research-backed strategies. We're looking at the biological reality of how the brain physically forms new language pathways.
Like what happens on a cellular level when you practice.
Exactly. And how you can actually hack that biological system to bypass the translation phase entirely.
Which is my absolute favorite part about the material for today's deep dive. We are actually going to build something tangible together.
A real action plan.
Yes. By the end of our time today, we're going to help you construct a specific, actionable, step-by-step weekly schedule. We're calling it the Daily Routine Documentary.
I love that name.
Right. We're going to combine highly targeted techniques like mental substitution, emotional anchoring, and advanced shadowing to fast-track your fluency.
So you're going to walk away with a literal blueprint for your week.
Okay, let's unpack this. Why does that agonizing pause happen in the first place? Like, what is biologically occurring inside the skull when someone asks us a simple question and we just hit a brick wall?
Well, to truly understand the pause, we have to look at the mechanics of what your brain is attempting to execute. And honestly, the sheer volume of processing power it requires.
Which is a lot, I'm guessing.
Oh, massive amounts. See, when a native speaker or someone who's achieved a really high level of fluency engages in a conversation, they're utilizing a highly efficient, very natural two-step process.
Just 2 steps.
Just 2. Step 1. The auditory cortex processes the sound, and the Wernicke's area decodes the meaning. They understand what was said.
Okay, so hear and understand. That's step 1.
Right. Step 2. Broca's area formulates the grammar, the motor cortex engages, and they respond. It's fluid. It's an immediate subconscious reaction.
So understand, then respond. Boom. 2 steps.
Boom. But when you're caught in the translation trap, even if you are at a solid intermediate level, your brain is absolutely not executing a 2-step process.
Oh, it's just doing instead.
It's forcing itself through what we call the cognitive tax of translation. It's a grueling, resource-heavy 4-step process.
The cognitive tax of translation, man, that sounds expensive.
It pays a heavy toll on your mental energy.
I mean, I know my brain already feels tired halfway through the day. If I have to pay a cognitive tax just to order a coffee, I'm going to be exhausted. So what exactly is the sequence of this 4-step delay?
Okay, it looks like this. Step 1. You hear the English phrase, and your brain has to consciously, deliberately work to decode the acoustic signals into recognized words.
Okay, that makes sense.
Step 2. You take those English words and you route them through your native language network. You literally translate the input internally just to understand the concept.
So I hear, how are you? But I have to turn it into my native language in my head to actually get what it means.
Exactly. Then step 3. You formulate your desired response, but you're still operating within the framework and vocabulary of your native language.
Right. I'm thinking of my answer in my native tone.
And finally, step 4. You take that fully formed native language concept and you painstakingly translate it back into English.
Searching for the right vocabulary?
Yes, searching for the vocabulary, applying the grammatical rules, all before you finally send the signal to your mouth to speak.
So wait, if we look at the brain biologically during that four-step process, what's actually happening? Like, are different parts of the brain lighting up compared to a native speaker?
Dramatically so. Language processing primarily happens in the left hemisphere for most people.
Right.
When a native speaker answers a question, you see a highly localized, efficient spark of electrical activity bouncing quickly between Wernicke's area, which handles comprehension, and Broca's area, which handles speech production.
It's just a quick little jump.
It's a tight, fast loop. But when someone is translating, functional MRI scans show massive, widespread activation. The electrical signals are ping-ponging across the whole brain.
Oh, wow. So it's a huge mess of activity.
It really is. They're jumping from the auditory centers over to the native language semantic networks, up to the prefrontal cortex, where conscious problem solving and working memory happen.
Because you're literally trying to solve a puzzle.
Exactly. Then back to the native language networks, and finally over to the English production centers.
That sounds wildly inefficient. It's basically like routing a short domestic flight through an entirely different continent just to get to the city next door.
That's a great way to picture it.
Like, you want to go from New York to Boston, but your brain is insisting on flying through London first. Yes, you'll technically arrive at your destination eventually, but you're losing a massive amount of time.
You're burning through all your cognitive fuel.
And frankly, you're probably going to lose your luggage, meaning the nuances of the conversation along the way. We need a direct flight. We need to build a direct biological connection between the abstract thought and the English word.
That is an excellent analogy. It perfectly highlights the necessity of that direct flight. But to understand how we actually build that direct flight from New York to Boston, we really have to talk about myelination.
Myelination. Okay, you are going to have to translate that for me. I'm familiar with the old cliche of the brain being an overgrown forest, right?
Sure.
And learning a new skill is like hacking a path through the bushes with a machete. Does myelination have something to do with the bushes?
Well, the forest analogy is incredibly common, but it actually glosses over the fascinating reality of how neuroplasticity really works.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's much more accurate to think of your brain as a massive, complex network of electrical wiring. Your neurons have these long cables called axons, which transmit electrical impulses.
Okay, so neurons and axons, I'm with you.
When you form a thought, an electrical signal travels down that axon. Now, when you first learn a new English word, that connection, that raw wire, is uninsulated.
Like a bare copper wire.
Exactly. It's a bare copper wire. And when electrical signal travels down a bare wire, two things happen. The signal leaks out, losing energy, and it travels very slowly.
Just because it doesn't have that coating.
Right. An impulse on an unmyelinated axon might travel at roughly 2 to 3 miles per hour. That's why it takes so much conscious effort to recall the word. You are literally waiting for this slow, leaky signal to reach its destination.
Wow, 2 miles an hour. That is painfully slow.
But every single time you successfully use that specific English word without translating it, your brain deploys cells called oligodendrocytes.
I'm going to pretend I know how to spell that. What do these cells do?
They're essentially the brain's electricians. They wrap a fatty white substance called myelin around that specific axon. They literally insulate the copper wire.
Oh, so they're putting the rubber coating on the wire.
Exactly. And the more you practice, the more layers of myelin they wrap around it. As the myelin sheath gets thicker, the electrical signal stops leaking. And more importantly, the speed of the transmission increases exponentially.
How fast are we talking?
A fully myelinated neural pathway can transmit signals at over 200 miles per hour.
200 miles per hour compared to 2 miles per hour? That is a staggering difference.
It is the biological difference between the agonizing, awkward pause and instant, effortless fluency. When you translate in your head, you're using the heavily myelinated lightning-fast highways of your native
See,
language.
because I've been using them my whole life.
Exactly. But the English pathways, they're still bare copper wires.
Mm-hmm.
So the brain, which is an organ uniquely obsessed with conserving energy and finding the path of least resistance, will always default to the native language highway.
That makes perfect sense. My brain isn't trying to sabotage me during that cafe conversation. It's just being incredibly lazy.
Really lazy.
It's looking for the fastest route possible, even if that route requires a layover in London. So how do we force the brain to stop taking the highway and start insulating the bare copper wires?
Well, the source material introduces a fundamental concept here, and it actually challenges a deeply held belief that most learners have.
Oh, what belief is that?
The belief that if you can't speak fluently, you just need to memorize more words, you need to expand your vocabulary. But the research argues otherwise, specifically for people at that intermediate B1 or B2 level.
Yes, and this is a paradigm-shifting realization for most language learners. If you're at an intermediate level, you almost certainly do not have a knowledge problem.
You have an activation problem.
Okay, let's drill down into that. What is the functional difference between knowledge and activation? I mean, if the word is in my brain, shouldn't I be able to use it?
Think about the way memories and vocabulary are stored. Your brain is not a static hard drive where you just click a folder and open a file. It's a dynamic network. You have spent months, maybe years, acquiring English words, grammar rules, and phrasal verbs. They are physically stored in your brain's semantic memory. But right now, because they lack that thick myelin insulation, the activation energy required to access them is too high for spontaneous conversation.
So it's like having a massive, beautifully curated library in my house with thousands of amazing books on the shelves. The knowledge is physically there. I own it.
Exactly.
But if I never actually walk over to the shelf, take a book down, open the pages, and read it, the knowledge does me absolutely no good in a real-world scenario. The books are just gathering dust.
Precisely. And what happens when a neural pathway gathers dust? The brain is a ruthless efficiency machine. It employs a process called synaptic pruning.
Pruning, like trimming a tree.
Exactly like that. If you have a neural connection that you rarely use, like an English word you memorize once on a flashcard but never actually use in daily thought, the brain assumes it's no longer necessary for your survival. So it literally prunes the connection to save energy.
Use it or lose it, literally.
Literally. So to prevent the pruning and build the myelin, we have to engage in a process called mental substitution.
Mental substitution.
Yes, it's the conscious, deliberate act of taking those dusty books off the shelf, opening them up, and forcing an electrical signal down those bare copper wires throughout your normal day.
Okay, I want to understand the actual technique of mental substitution because, honestly, my instinct tells me that this is just going to lead right back to translating.
How so?
Well, if I'm going about my day and I have a thought in my native language, the technique asks me to pause and consciously ask myself, how would I say this exact thought in English? But isn't that literally the definition of translation?
I see what you mean.
I feel like we're contradicting ourselves. I thought the entire mission of today's deep dive was to stop translating.
It is a totally valid challenge, and it's a nuance that trips up a lot of learners. But we have to distinguish between the environment of execution and the environment of training.
Okay, explain that.
There is a profound neurological difference between translating during a live conversation and substituting during your internal monologue. In a conversation, the presence of another human being introduces a massive amount of cognitive pressure.
Oh, for sure. You have a time constraint. You have social anxiety.
Exactly. In that high-stakes environment, the four-step translation process causes the system to crash. You freeze.
Right. It's the pressure that makes the translation toxic.
Exactly. But your internal monologue, that is a zero-pressure environment. When you catch a thought while you're walking down the street and deliberately rephrase it in English, you are intentionally firing an electrical signal down the English pathway to trigger the oligodendrocytes to build more myelin.
Because no one is waiting for my answer.
Right. You're not under a time limit. You are taking a concept that naturally originated in your native language and deliberately using it as a catalyst to strengthen the English connection.
I see. So it's the difference between trying to read the emergency exit manual while the airplane is currently plummeting toward the earth versus calmly reading the manual while you're sitting at the gate before the flight takes off.
That's perfect, yes.
You're practicing the sequence in a safe environment so that the muscle memory, or in this case, the myelin, is fully developed when the actual high-pressure event occurs.
That's exactly it. You're intentionally building the direct flight route. when you aren't in a rush to travel.
Hmm.
And there is a specific methodology to this mental substitution that the source material emphasizes.
It's not just translating a thought once.
No, absolutely not. Let's look at the coffee example, because it highlights a really important rule, the multiple expressions rule.
Yes, the coffee example. This is where I started to see how mental substitution transforms from a basic, boring translation exercise into a real fluency builder.
Walk us through it.
Okay, so the scenario from the research is this. You're standing in your kitchen, you're making your morning coffee, you take a sip, and you naturally have a very simple, instantaneous thought in your native language. The core concept of the thought is, I need more sugar.
A very common thought.
Right. Now, basic level 1 mental substitution would be catching that thought, pausing, and simply saying to yourself in English, I need more sugar, boom, done. The book is off the shelf.
But the source tells us that stopping there is a massive missed opportunity.
It is. If you only translate it once, you're only firing a signal down one extremely narrow pathway. You're building a single fragile wire.
So what does the multiple expressions rule demand?
It demands that you challenge yourself. If your native thought is, I need more sugar, you translate it. But then you ask yourself, how else could I express this exact same conceptual desire in English?
Right. So you force the brain to search the archives.
Exactly. You might think that this coffee isn't sweet enough, or you might shift the grammar and think, I'd like to add some more sugar to this, or maybe this needs to be sweeter.
You're taking one single abstract concept, the desire for a sweeter beverage, and you are generating 2, 3, maybe 4 completely different lexical and grammatical ways to express it. What's fascinating here is how this specific exercise builds what neuroscientists call cognitive flexibility.
Cognitive flexibility.
Yes. Human communication is incredibly unpredictable. It's not a rigid math equation where 2 plus 2 always equals 4. There is rarely only one correct way to express a feeling or need.
That's so true.
When you practice generating multiple expressions for a single thought, you are not just clearing one narrow path, you're building a robust, interconnected web of neural pathways.
And practically speaking, in the real world, this solves a huge, terrifying problem. We've all been in that situation where you try to say something in your non-native language, you finally manage to get the sentence out, and the person you're talking to just stares at you with a blank, confused look.
The worst feel.
They didn't catch your accent, or they didn't understand your phrasing. If you only have one highly myelinated pathway, if you only know exactly one way to say, I need more sugar, and they don't understand it, you're trapped.
The system crashes.
You have no backup plan. But if you have spent weeks practicing the multiple expressions rule,
Then your brain does not trigger the panic response. It simply reroutes the signal to the next available myelinated pathway. Oh, you didn't understand? I need more sugar? That's perfectly fine. Let me effortlessly pivot to this coffee isn't sweet enough.
it makes you incredibly resilient in real-time conversations.
You're giving your brain options, which inherently lowers the stress of the interaction.
Okay, I am completely sold on the biology and the strategy of this. We promised the listener at the top of the show that we were going to build a practical schedule, the daily routine documentary. Let's lay down the foundation for that right now. Let's build part 1 of the schedule.
I think the most crucial aspect of the schedule is that it must seamlessly integrate into what the listener is already doing. It cannot require an extra hour of sitting at a desk.
Exactly. We're all too busy for that. So, for this upcoming week, your mission as the listener is to identify exactly 3 daily routine activities.
And we mean simple activities.
Yes. Do not pick anything complex that requires deep focus, like writing an email or driving in heavy traffic. Choose 3 mundane automatic tasks that you do every single day.
Give us some examples.
For example, the act of making your breakfast in the morning, your daily commute on the train or bus, and your routine of washing your face and brushing your teeth before bed.
Those are perfect.
Those 3 blocks of time are now your designated non-negotiable practice zones.
And during those specific zones, the assignment is to relentlessly practice mental substitution, utilizing the multiple expressions rule.
So you're standing at the bathroom sink brushing your teeth. You catch the thought, and you narrate the action in your head. First attempt, I'm brushing my teeth.
But you do not stop there.
You push for the triple expression. You force the brain to find another route. Attempt 2, I'm cleaning my teeth right now. Attack 3, I'm using my toothbrush before I go to sleep.
When you describe it out loud, it seems almost absurdly simple, doesn't it? Just silently narrating mundane household actions in multiple ways. Some people might even find it a bit tedious.
It does feel a little silly. If someone could read my mind while I'm doing this, they would think I'm the most boring person on earth. I mean, is this actually going to yield results, or am I just going to become really, really good at talking about dental hygiene?
Well, neuroplasticity doesn't care if the content is exciting or boring. It only cares about the frequency and the intensity of the electrical signal.
Okay, so the brain just likes the repetition.
Exactly. If you do this consistently across 3 daily routines for just 1 week, you will genuinely start to notice a cognitive shift. You're forcing the brain to repeatedly access the English semantic network outside of a formal study environment.
Because you've deliberately spent the week blazing multiple overlapping trails.
Right, so the English language will begin to flow more naturally into your conscious thought. The activation energy required to access the vocabulary drops significantly.
Okay, so narrating, I am brushing my teeth 3 different ways, is a fantastic starting point. It primes the pump and starts thickening the myelin. But I have to push back a little on the scope of this.
Push away.
Real life, real human conversation is not just walking around a room labeling things like an observant toddler. We don't just state obvious physical facts. We have complex thoughts. We have strong opinions. We have intense internal debates about the past and the future. How do we take this basic mental substitution and elevate it so that it can handle the messy, abstract reality of human thought?
That is the necessary next step in the evolution of this practice. That's where we transition from simple declarative substitution into cultivating a true, robust, bilingual inner monologue.
A bilingual inner monologue.
And we have to transform your own mind into a safe, dynamic space for complex language generation.
Basically, we're talking about actively talking to yourself in your head. Now, I will freely admit, I do this constantly in my native language. I'll walk down the street having full-blown, passionate arguments with people who aren't even there.
Oh, we all do it.
I'll rehearse what I'm going to say to my boss. I'll complain to myself about the weather.
It's a universal human trait. That internal narrative voice is how we process reality. And the source material heavily suggests that harnessing that natural existing tendency to talk to yourself is one of these single most powerful yet vastly overlooked tools for language mastery.
But the instructions the source provides for starting this process seem a little counterintuitive again. The recommendation is to start by actively thinking a complex sentence in your native language and then immediately forcing yourself to repeat that exact same complex sentence internally in English.
Right.
Again, I have to play devil's advocate here. Aren't we just deeply reinforcing the native language pathway? Why am I letting the native language lead the dance?
It's a very perceptive question. But remember the concept of lowering the affective filter, the emotional barrier to learning. By allowing the complex thought to originate in your native language first, you are guaranteeing that the thought is genuinely authentic to who you are.
So I'm not just translating a textbook phrase.
Exactly. You aren't dumbing yourself down to match your English level. You are having a real adult thought. Then, by immediately forcing the English translation in the zero-pressure environment of your own mind, you're acting as your own simultaneous interpreter.
So we're using the safety of our own mind to practice the complex translation deliberately, knowing that it's just a stepping stone to direct thought.
Precisely. And here's where the neurology of the lazy brain works in our favor. Your brain is constantly auditing its own energy expenditure. It wants to find the absolute most efficient way to perform any recurring task.
It wants to optimize the system.
Exactly. If you consistently practice this bilingual inner monologue complex native thought, followed immediately by the complex English translation over and over again, your brain's optimization algorithms will eventually kick in.
What does that realization look like for the brain?
It will analyze the process and realize, wait a minute, I am expending a massive amount of caloric energy forming this thought in the native language and then dragging it over to the English network. The ingrate pathway is getting really strong and heavily myelinated now. It would be significantly more energy efficient to just initiate this specific type of thought directly in the English network to begin with.
Oh, wow. So the brain just naturally starts cutting out the middleman because it is biologically cheaper. The translation step simply withers away because the direct route is now faster and costs less energy.
That is exactly how it happens. Over time, the English will start preempting the native language. You will begin to have spontaneous, highly complex thoughts directly in English without needing the native language prompt.
But that automaticity only emerges if you put in the grueling repetitions in that low-pressure training ground.
Yes, you have to do the reps.
Okay, I am entirely sold on the mechanics of it, but we need to talk about the actual content of this internal monologue, because the source material gives a very stark, explicit warning: do not be boring.
Yes. Thinking, the sky is blue, I am sitting on a chair, the dog is walking, is perfectly fine for day one of learning a language, but it's not going to get an intermediate learner to fluency.
Right. The example they give in the research perfectly illustrates how to level this up. Let's say you're walking down the street and you see someone walking past you wearing a really cool vintage leather jacket. The boring labeling approach, the approach we just used for brushing our teeth, would be to simply think, that is a nice jacket.
Right, which is grammatically correct.
It uses the English pathway, but it's totally sterile.
It lacks depth. It does not reflect the multidimensional way a human mind actually processes the world.
Exactly. The source challenges us to elevate that monologue into a multi-layered internal conversation. Instead of just, that is a nice jacket, you train yourself to instantly expand the thought. You think, wow, that leather jacket is incredibly stylish. I wonder where they bought it. I'd love to have something like that for the winter, maybe in a darker brown color. I should probably look online later to see how much they cost.
Notice the massive shift in cognitive complexity there.
Yeah.
You've moved away from a simple declarative statement. In one continuous thought process, you're expressing an aesthetic opinion, you are forming a hypothetical question, you are stating a personal preference, and you are making a future plan.
All at once.
Yes, that is the true texture of real human language. By demanding that level of complexity from your English pathways in your safe space, you are deeply preparing your brain for the unpredictable demands of actual fluid conversation.
And there's another layer to this inner monologue that the sources emphasize, which I found to be the most utterly fascinating part of the entire deep dive so far. It's about emotional anchors.
Oh, this is a big one.
The source argues, quite forcefully, that if you want to remember words forever, you have to connect your English practice to genuine, visceral emotion. Why is emotion the secret ingredient here?
This is perhaps the most crucial piece of the neuroscientific puzzle when it comes to long-term memory consolidation. We often think of learning as a purely intellectual exercise happening in the advanced, rational parts of the brain, like the prefrontal cortex.
Like studying a math problem.
Right. But emotions are not just abstract feelings. They are deeply rooted physiological events processed in the limbic system, specifically the amygdala and the hippocampus. This is a very ancient, very deep, very powerful part of the brain responsible for survival.
So how does survival connect to remembering English vocabulary?
When you experience a strong emotion, fear, anger, intense joy, shock, your brain releases a flood of neurotransmitters, like norepinephrine and dopamine. These chemicals basically act like a biological highlighter pen.
A biological highlighter pen. I like that.
They soak the surrounding neural pathways and signal to the hippocampus. Whatever information is being processed right now is incredibly important for our survival. Do not forget this under any circumstances.
Wow.
When you connect a new piece of English vocabulary to a genuine emotional state, you are fusing the language to your fundamental biology. You are supercharging the neural connection.
And the source uses the perfect, slightly cheeky example to prove this phenomenon. Swear words. Think about it. Why is it that the absolute first thing a beginner learns in a new language and remembers with perfect pronunciation forever without ever using a flashcard are the curse words?
Because they are almost never taught in a sterile academic environment. You do not learn curse words from a textbook while feeling slightly bored.
Definitely not.
You learn them when someone drops a hammer on their foot and screams in agony, or when someone cuts you off in traffic and you're furious, or when you're laughing hysterically with a group of friends.
The emotion is huge.
The words are injected into your brain on a massive tidal wave of emotion, and the limbic system locks them in permanently.
So we need to harness that biological highlighter pen, but maybe use it for more than just swearing at bad drivers. The challenge to the listener is to start expressing their genuine, raw, daily emotions completely in English within their inner monologue.
Yes, this is how you take the language off the textbook page and make it real. When you're rushing out the door and you drop your car keys on the floor and you feel that sudden flash of hot frustration, do not let your native language take over.
Intercept it.
Intercept the signal. Force that genuine frustration through the English pathway. Think, I can't believe this is happening right now. This is so incredibly annoying. I'm going to be late. Feel the actual anger, but express it entirely in English.
And it works equally well for positive emotions, too. You check your email, and you get a piece of fantastic news about a project, and you consciously force yourself to think, this is absolutely wonderful. I am so incredibly relieved and proud of this.
If you actively connect the English language to your authentic frustration, your unbridled joy, your sudden surprise, and your deep anxiety, then English stops being an academic subject that you study.
It becomes a real part of you.
It becomes a living, breathing tool that you use to process your actual existence. It becomes the language of your emotions, not just your intellect. And that is when true fluency begins to take root.
Okay, this is incredible. We are fundamentally rebuilding the internal machinery of the mind. We are substituting mundane thoughts, we are engaging in highly complex internal dialogues, and we're anchoring the language to the deep limbic system with raw emotions.
It's a lot of internal work.
But if we're demanding our brain to generate all this high-level internal language, we have to talk about the fuel we are feeding our brain. We have to look at the input, because you simply cannot output what you haven't inputted.
Input, the media you listen to and the text you read, is the absolute foundational bedrock of language acquisition. It's the raw material the brain uses to build the myelin.
But ironically, this is also the exact area where highly motivated learners make some of the most catastrophic strategic errors.
Oh, constantly.
The sources outline two massive, opposing traps that learners fall into when choosing what content to consume. Let's look at trap number one. This is the trap of choosing content that is way too easy.
Right. This happens all the time. A learner finds a beginner-level podcast, or they buy a children's book, or they watch a show like Peppa Pig, and it feels incredibly comfortable.
Because they understand everything.
They understand every single word. They feel smart. But neurologically speaking, comfort is the enemy of growth. If your brain is not encountering new grammatical structures, unfamiliar idioms, or novel vocabulary, it has no reason to build new neural pathways. The system stagnates. You plateau instantly.
So reading a children's book over and over is basically linguistic junk food. It tastes good, but there's no nutritional value. But then in a desperate attempt to fix that plateau, people swing wildly in the completely opposite direction and fall into trap number two. They choose content that is insanely, punishingly difficult.
The immersion by drowning approach.
Exactly. They decide, I'm an adult, I'm going to learn real adult English. So they turn on a complex, rapid-fire political debate on cable news, or they try to read a dense academic journal on macroeconomics, or they try to watch a gritty crime drama with heavy regional accents.
And what's the biological result? They understand maybe 10 or 15% of the input. The brain cannot find any recognizable patterns to latch onto. It becomes totally overwhelmed by the noise.
The brain just shuts down.
The amygdala senses failure, floods the system with stress hormones like cortisol, and the learner walks away feeling deeply demoralized, fundamentally convinced that they just don't have the talent for languages. It's incredibly counterproductive.
So if too easy is a neurological dead end, and too hard is a demoralizing brick wall that floods the brain with cortisol, where is the middle ground? How do we find the exact right fuel?
The linguistic term for that perfect middle ground was coined by linguist Stephen Krashen. He called it the comprehensible input hypothesis. This is essentially the holy grail of language learning.
What does it mean?
Krashen argued that we only acquire language in one way, when we understand messages. So the goal is to find content that is designated as I+1. I is your current level of proficiency, and +1 means it is just slightly above your current level.
The sweet spot. Not too hot, not too cold.
Exactly. For practical application, we refer to this as the 70% rule. You can aim to consume content where you naturally understand roughly 70 to 80% of the material without needing any outside help from a dictionary or a translator.
You can grasp the main ideas.
Yes, you can comfortably follow the narrative arc and you understand the core arguments being made. But that remaining 20 to 30%, that is the magic zone. That is the growth zone. Those are the slightly unfamiliar words, the complex grammatical structures, the new slang phrases that challenge your brain to guess the meaning from the surrounding context.
Okay, let's make this intensely practical for the listener.
Yeah.
How do we apply this strict 70% rule to reading? Because reading a book in a foreign language always feels like a massive chore if you're constantly grabbing your phone to look up a word on a dictionary app every 2 minutes.
If you're constantly grabbing a dictionary, you're not reading. You are translating. You are reinforcing the exact 4-step delay we're trying to destroy.
So what's the alternative?
The source proposes a very strict application of the 70% rule for reading. You pick up a text, you read a single page. If you do not naturally, effortlessly understand more than 30% of the words on that page, put the text down immediately. Walk away. It is too hard.
Really? Just abandon the book. Isn't that giving up?
It's not giving up. It is strategic retreat. True reading comprehension relies on flow. You must be able to read smoothly enough that when you encounter an unknown word, your brain has enough surrounding comprehensible context to accurately guess its meaning.
Ah, I see.
That subconscious act of guessing from context is exactly how native speakers build their massive vocabularies over a lifetime, and it's exactly how you must build yours. If there are too many unknown words, the context collapses and you can't guess.
So, if adult novels are too hard and children's books are too easy, what exactly should the listener be reading to hit that 70% sweet spot?
The sources highly recommend starting with graded readers. These are books, often classic novels or highly engaging modern thriller stories, that have been specifically intentionally rewritten by linguists using vocabulary and grammar restricted to a certain proficiency level like B1 or B2.
I can hear a significant portion of our listeners groaning right now. Graded readers sound like they belong in a middle school classroom. I'm a professional adult. I want to read real, authentic stuff. I want to read the New York Times.
It's a very common objection, driven by ego, but it is neurologically misguided. The primary goal is to build fluency, flow, and the habit of thinking in English without friction. Graded readers allow you to experience the immersive flow of a narrative without the stop-and-start friction of a dictionary.
But what if they really want authentic material?
However, if the listener absolutely insists on consuming authentic, non-graded materials, the rule of thumb is simple. Read obsessively about your own deeply held personal interests and hobbies.
Oh, this is a fantastic point, because extreme motivation can actually override linguistic difficulty.
Precisely. If you are deeply obsessed with cooking, go read complex English cooking blogs. If you love Formula One racing, read the British sports pages. If you are a software developer, read highly technical coding forums.
Because you already know the concepts.
Because you already possess a massive amount of background knowledge about the subject matter in your native language, you'll be able to guess English words much more easily. And because you desperately want to know the information being presented, your brain will push through the cognitive fatigue. Extreme motivation is the ultimate accelerator for comprehensible input.
Okay, so that covers reading. What about listening? Because listening to native speakers talking at full, conversational speed is objectively terrifying. The words do not have spaces between them like they do on a page. They all bleed together into one continuous stream of noise.
Yes, connected speech is very difficult.
The source offers a brilliant, highly actionable pro tip for this, specifically regarding watching TV shows or movies with subtitles.
Subtitles are a fantastic safety net. They allow you to consume native-level high-speed audio while confirming your understanding visually. But the pro tip takes it a critical step further. When watching a show with English subtitles, do not just read the words at the exact same time the actor speaks them. Train your eyes to read ahead slightly.
Read ahead. So, you glance down at the text just a split second before the actor actually delivers the line audibly.
Yes, if we connect this to the bigger picture of how the brain processes acoustic signals, what you are doing is called priming. By reading the words a millisecond before you hear them, you are sending a direct message to your auditory cortex, telling it exactly what acoustic frequencies and phones to expect.
You're essentially giving your brain's processing center a cheat sheet.
Exactly. This dramatically improves your brain's physical ability to separate the rapid stream of noise into distinct, understandable individual words.
That is such a clever biological hack. You're literally telling your brain, hey, focus all your energy on looking out for these specific sounds that are about to happen. Now, there is one more crucial aspect to input that we absolutely have to cover, and it's about repetition. But the source makes a very clear scientific distinction between bad repetition and good repetition.
Bad repetition is the brute force method. It's reading the exact same BBC News article 5 times in a row in a single afternoon, determined to memorize every single word and grammatical structure.
That sounds awful.
It might technically work, but it is soul-crushingly boring. And from a neurological standpoint, the brain tends to literally switch off and stop forming memories when it becomes bored.
So if brute force repetition doesn't work, what is the alternative? How do we lock the vocabulary in?
We use the biology of memory consolidation. We use spaced re-exposure.
Spaced re-exposure. Okay, I need the actual biology behind this. How does the schedule for this work, and why does it work?
It revolves around how the hippocampus and the neocortex interact, particularly during sleep. Here is the schedule. You find a piece of high-quality, comprehensible input, say a 10-minute podcast episode about a topic you love. You listen to it on day one because you picked well, you understand about 70% of it. You enjoy it, you struggle a little bit with the unknown words, and then you put it away.
Do not listen to it again that day. Let your brain rest.
Okay, day one is done. What happens next?
Then, on day 3, you listen to that exact same 10-minute podcast episode again.
Wait, why wait 2 full days? Why not the next morning?
Because you need multiple cycles of sleep. During the day, your hippocampus acts like a temporary USB drive, taking in all the raw acoustic data and new words. But it's only during deep sleep, and specifically REM sleep, that the brain transfers that data from the temporary USB drive of the hippocampus into the permanent hard drive of the neocortex. So the sleep is doing the work.
Over the last 48 hours, your brain has physically wired new synapses where you slept. So on day 3, you're approaching the material with a biologically upgraded brain. Plus, you already know the general narrative context. So on day 3, without any extra effort, your comprehension naturally jumps from 70% to maybe 85%. You will suddenly clearly hear words that sounded like pure gibberish the first time.
That is an incredible feeling. I've experienced that. It feels like you've developed a superpower overnight.
It is deeply motivating because you can literally feel yourself getting smarter. And then you wait again. On day 7, you listen to that same episode one final time. By this point, your brain has had a full week of sleep cycles to consolidate the patterns. Your comprehension will be pushing your 100%. The listening will feel effortless.
Because the neural pathways associated with that specific vocabulary and rhythm have been heavily myelinated through the spacing effect.
Exactly.
Okay, let's take a breath and look at the massive foundation we've built so far. We've tuned our input perfectly using the 70% rule. We're reading about our specific hobbies to override difficulty. We're priming our auditory cortex with subtitles. And we're using the biology of sleep and spaced re-exposure to lock the data into the neocortex. Our brains are absolutely swimming in high-quality, comprehensible English.
It's a perfect environment. But here is the harsh, unavoidable reality of language learning. You cannot learn how to swim by standing on the dry edge of the pool watching Olympic swimming videos.
You can understand the hydrodynamic theory perfectly.
You can memorize the movements, but until you jump into the water and start physically moving your own arms, you are not swimming.
It's time to get in the water. It's time to shift from consuming to creating. It's time to focus on output. It's time to actually open our mouths and speak.
And this is precisely where the vast majority of language learners hit a massive, seemingly insurmountable wall of fear.
Oh, absolutely. The fear is visceral. It's an evolutionary fear. It's the fear of sounding stupid. It's the fear of making a grammatical mistake and having a native speaker judge your intelligence.
And the fear of that agonizing, awkward pause we talked about at the very beginning of the deep dive.
And because of that intense social fear, people can spend literally years, sometimes decades, trapped in the safe, comfortable consumption phase. They read, they listen to podcasts, they study advanced flashcards, but they have zero production. They never actually speak.
But the neuroscience is unambiguous on this point. You simply cannot train the brain's output pathways using only input mechanisms. Listening and reading happen in Wernicke's area. Speaking requires Broca's area and the motor cortex. They are entirely different neural circuits.
You have to physically practice speaking to be able to speak.
You have to move the muscles in your face, your tongue, and your vocal cords.
So we have to bridge that gap. We know it's terrifying to walk up to a native speaker and start talking when you feel totally unprepared and vulnerable. So let's go back to our weekly schedule. Let's build the second half of our listeners' daily routine documentary. We're going to implement 3 specific, highly effective solo output techniques.
These are methods you can use to practice speaking out loud, physically moving your mouth, without anyone else in the room to judge you.
Solo output is the perfect transitional tool. It completely removes the social anxiety and the fear of judgment while still forcing the brain and the motor cortex to generate language in real time.
Technique number 1 for our schedule: shadowing. What exactly is shadowing and how does it engage the brain?
Shadowing is a technique that relies heavily on the brain's mirror neuron system. It's the practice of listening to a native speaker on a podcast, an audiobook, or a YouTube video, and attempting to repeat exactly what they are saying, mimicking their rhythm, their intonation, and their exact pronunciation as closely as physically possible.
You're basically acting like an analytical parrot.
Yes, an analytical parrot. And there are 2 distinct levels of difficulty to this practice. Basic shadowing is relatively straightforward and good for beginners. You listen to a single sentence, you hit pause on the audio, and you repeat the sentence out loud, trying to match the speaker's melody from memory.
That sounds manageable. It gives you time to process.
It's a good starting point. But advanced shadowing is where the real neurological magic happens for intermediate learners. In advanced shadowing, you do not hit the pause button. You attempt to speak along with the audio continuously in real time, functioning almost like a simultaneous echo, lagging just a split second behind the original speaker.
That sounds incredibly difficult. Trying to listen to incoming audio and speak out loud at the exact same time, my brain would short circuit.
It's highly cognitively demanding, but the payoff is immense. It violently forces your mouth muscles to adapt to the physical speed and rhythm of native speech. It trains your brain to process the auditory input and immediately, instantly generate the corresponding motor output.
And most importantly, it bypasses the translation phase entirely because you simply do not have the milliseconds required to translate the words into your native language. You have to react instantly.
Okay, so that's shadowing. It builds speed and rhythm. But if I'm just echoing someone else, how do I know I'm actually doing it right? I might be saying the words, but my pronunciation could be terrible and I wouldn't even realize it because I'm so focused on keeping up.
Which brings us to technique number 2 for our weekly schedule, recording yourself.
No, I have to be honest. I will be the first to admit I despise the sound of my own recorded voice. Even in my native language, hearing myself played back makes me cringe.
Almost everyone hates it. It's a well-documented phenomenon. We naturally hear our own voices conducted internally through the bones of our skull, which makes our voice sound deeper, richer, and more resonant to ourselves. Hearing the true external recording is jarring.
But you have to push past the cringe factor because recording your own voice turns you into your own most effective, objective teacher.
Why is it so necessary? Why can't I just listen to myself while I'm speaking?
Because when you are speaking a foreign language in the moment, your brain is utilizing absolutely all of its available bandwidth just trying to find the vocabulary and arrange the grammar. You literally do not have the cognitive capacity left over to accurately monitor your own pronunciation.
You might think you sounded perfectly clear and eloquent, but you weren't actually capable of listening to yourself.
Right. It's only when you step out of the execution phase and play it back that you hear the harsh reality.
Exactly. When you listen to the playback, you shift from output mode back to input mode. Your analytical brain comes back online. You will suddenly, painfully hear the mistakes. You'll notice that you're speaking way too fast, or that you are consistently dropping the s off plural words, or that your intonation is completely flat and robotic.
So what is the actual exercise here? How do we put this painful but necessary task into the weekly schedule?
It needs to be a highly targeted, focused exercise to avoid overwhelming the learner. Step 1. Choose a very simple, familiar topic, something like, what did I do this weekend? Or a quick review of the movie I watched last night.
Step 2. Hit record on your phone's voice memo app and speak continuously for exactly 2 minutes.
And if I mess up, if I forget a word,
just push through the mistakes. Do not stop and restart. Treat it like a live conversation. Then, step 3. Listen back to the 2-minute recording. But here is the critical, non-negotiable constraint. As you listen, you are only allowed to identify exactly 3 things you want to fix.
Only 3. But what if I listen back and I realize I made 20 massive grammatical mistakes?
If you try to fix 20 mistakes at once, you will become paralyzed by cognitive overload. The brain cannot focus on that many variables simultaneously while trying to speak. Pick 3 specific, highly manageable things. Maybe you mispronounced a specific vowel sound, maybe you kept forgetting to use the article the, and maybe you used the filler word too much. Note those 3 specific things.
Then.
Step 4. Hit record again and speak on the exact same topic for another 2 minutes, focusing exclusively on improving those 3 specific elements. When you compare the first recording to the second recording, the immediate improvement will shock you. It's a process of targeted, rapid iteration. It proves to your brain that you are capable of self-correction.
I love that. It takes the massive, overwhelming, vague task of getting better at English and reduces it to a highly solvable puzzle, fixing these 3 tiny things in the next 2 minutes.
Okay, which brings us to technique number 3, the grand finale of our solo practice, the ultimate output goal that ties every single concept we've discussed today together into one master exercise, the daily routine documentary.
This is the pinnacle of the schedule. This is where we take the silent mental substitution from the beginning of the week and we make it physical.
So, to recap for the listener, earlier in the schedule, we had you practicing mental substitution in 3 specific daily routines, like brushing your teeth or commuting. But you were doing it silently, purely in your head, blazing multiple paths. The daily routine documentary demands that you do it out loud.
Yes, you're narrating your physical actions, your observations, your internal thoughts, and your feelings as they happen in real time, speaking at full volume to an empty room as if you're the star of your own deeply mundane documentary film.
Let me paint a vivid picture for the listener of what this actually looks like in practice. Let's say your chosen routine for the documentary is making lunch. You're alone in your kitchen. You start narrating out loud continuously. Okay, now I'm making lunch. Let me open the fridge and see what we have. Oh, there's some cheddar cheese and a few tomatoes left. That's perfect. I'll make a sandwich. I think I'll twist the bread first so it gets a little crunchy because I hate soft bread. Where's the good knife to slice the tomato? You're literally standing alone in a room talking out loud to yourself about cheese and cutlery.
Let's be honest, it sounds deeply eccentric.
It sounds entirely crazy. If your roommate or your spouse walks in on you doing this, you're going to look insane. So what does this all mean? Why are we asking the listener to risk their dignity to do this? What is the profound scientific benefit of talking out loud to a slice of cheese?
Because it's the absolute closest simulation you can create to the neurological demands of a real live conversation without actually having another human being present to trigger your anxiety. When you're narrating your physical actions in real time, you're practicing true, spontaneous English production. You aren't reading from a textbook script. You aren't answering a pre-planned question. You're forcing your brain to observe reality, formulate an abstract thought about that reality, retrieve the English vocabulary, apply the grammar, and physically speak the words out loud, all simultaneously.
And doing this specifically during a physical automated routine is the key to why it works, right?
That's the neurological genius of the exercise. When you're performing an automatic, highly procedural task like chopping vegetables, folding the laundry, washing dishes, or taking a shower, your body's operating on autopilot. Those actions are controlled by the basal ganglia. That physical automation frees up a massive amount of cognitive bandwidth in your prefrontal cortex. Your brain has extra energy available, and you're taking that surplus energy and redirecting it entirely into spontaneous language generation. You're building the spontaneous speaking muscle in a completely safe, low-stress environment.
So let's review the comprehensive weekly schedule we've built, Monday through Sunday. You're doing the silent triple expression mental substitution during 3 daily routines. You're doing 2 minutes of recorded, targeted self-correction, and you're spending maybe 10 minutes a day narrating your life out loud in the daily routine documentary. You're building the thick myelin pathways. You're doing the work. But eventually, the training wheels have to come off. You have to leave the safety of your house. You have to step out of the shower, put down the cheese, and enter the wild. You're going to have a real, unpredictable conversation with a real human being. And despite all this meticulous daily practice, there will be a moment where the social pressure hits you, the anxiety spikes, and your brain just freezes.
It's inevitable. Even the most seasoned learners experience the mental block.
We need to talk about surviving the wild. When that freeze happens, when the mental block drops like an iron gate across your vocabulary and you're staring blankly at the person, what is biologically happening in that exact second?
It's crucial to understand that it's a physiological response, not an intellectual failure. A mental block is not a sign that you are stupid or that you haven't studied enough or that you have magically forgotten the entire language. It's an amygdala hijack. It's your brain's evolutionary stress response. When you feel anxious because you're intensely worried about looking foolish or incompetent in front of a native speaker, your amygdala, which is the brain's threat detection center, triggers a mild fight or flight response.
Wait, your brain actually thinks a casual conversation with a barista is a literal life or death threat.
From an evolutionary standpoint, yes. For early humans, social rejection from the tribe meant isolation, and isolation meant certain death. The brain software hasn't fully updated to realize that making a grammar mistake at Starbucks won't kill you. And when you're in a biological stress state, the brain prioritizes immediate physical survival over complex cognitive tasks. It floods the system with cortisol, which literally restricts access to your prefrontal cortex, your higher-order language processing centers. The vocabulary is still physically stored in your brain, but the chemical environment of stress has temporarily locked the door to the library.
Okay, so knowing that it's a chemical stress response, an amygdala hijack, is deeply comforting. It means we shouldn't panic and judge ourselves. But comfort doesn't finish the sentence. We still need technical tools to unlock the door to the library in the middle of a live conversation. The source outlines 2 specific, real-time tactics for when you freeze. The first tactic is something I absolutely love. They call them filler phrases, but I prefer to think of them as bridges.
Bridges is a much more accurate metaphor for what they actually do neurologically. When you're asked a question and your mind goes completely blank, the absolute worst thing you can do is stand there in pure, agonizing silence. The silence increases the social pressure, which increases the panic, which pumps more cortisol into your brain, which locks the door even tighter.
Right, you're just spiraling downward. The silence is deafening.
So you immediately deploy a bridge. A filler phrase is a pre-memorized, highly practiced, completely automatic chunk of English that you can deploy instantly without needing access to your higher order processing. Phrases like, let me think about that for a second, or that is a really interesting question, how should I put this? Or even just a simple, well, it's a bit complicated, but
These phrases are essentially verbal magic tricks. They accomplish three vital things simultaneously. First, they break the terrifying silence, which instantly lowers the social pressure and signals to the other person that you're engaged. Second, they keep the conversation flowing entirely in the English network, so you aren't tempted to fall back into translating from your native language. And third, and most importantly from a biological perspective, they buy your prefrontal cortex the 3 to 5 seconds of time it desperately needs to clear the cortisol, route the direct flight, and locate the actual vocabulary you want to use.
it's a brilliant strategy because native speakers use these exact same bridges constantly. We just don't notice it because it feels so natural. Listen to any unscripted podcast interview with a highly articulate politician or a celebrity. Half of what they say in the first 10 seconds of an answer are filler phrases, buying time for their brain to construct the actual argument. It sounds completely natural, and it gives you the grace period you need to recover from the hijack.
Okay, so we deploy the bridge, we buy the 3 seconds. But what if the specific vocabulary word we want still isn't there? What if the thought we're trying to express is just inherently too complex for our current English level? This brings us to the second real-time survival tactic, simplification.
This is where the ego and the perfectionism of adult language learners actively hurt them. We often freeze because we are stubbornly trying to translate a highly nuanced, extremely complex thought word for word from our highly developed native language into English. And we simply do not have the architectural vocabulary to do it yet.
The source provides a fantastic, highly relatable example of this specific trap. Let's say you're at a networking event and someone asks you about your career plans. Your internal native language thought is, I'm considering whether to pursue a master's degree in structural engineering or if it would be more prudent to start working immediately after graduation to gain practical field experience.
That's a dense, academic, multi-clause sentence. It requires specific conditional structures, advanced vocabulary like prudent and pursue, and precise grammar. If you try to translate that word for word on the spot while your amygdala is firing, your system will absolutely crash. You will stand there with your mouth open.
So instead of stubbornly trying to sound like a philosopher, giving up and looking foolish, you actively challenge yourself to drastically simplify the concept. You extract the absolute core meaning of the thought. The core meaning of that massive sentence is simply school or job.
Exactly. You strip away the nuance and you output the simplified version. I'm thinking about my future right now. I don't know if I should study more or if I should get a job. I'm not sure yet.
It's a profound shift in mindset. You intentionally abandon the desire to sound like an intellectual in the short term, and you prioritize effective, functional communication. And what I love is that getting the simple version out often acts like priming the pump for the brain.
Yes, it breaks the dam. Once you successfully deliver the simplified message, the stress dissipates. The amygdala realizes you survived the interaction and calms down. The cortisol clears. The door to the library unlocks. And very often you'll find that a few seconds later, the more complex vocabulary suddenly becomes magically accessible, and you can casually add more detail to your simplified statement.
All of this, the bridges, the radical simplification, the shadowing, it really comes down to fundamentally changing our relationship with making mistakes. The expert researcher in the source material makes a really strong counterintuitive argument here. They argue that mistakes aren't just acceptable. Mistakes are actually good.
It's an incredibly difficult paradigm shift for adults to make. As adults, we're used to being highly competent in our daily lives. We know how to do our jobs. We know how to navigate the world. We deeply hate looking foolish or incompetent. But in language learning, your error rate is your compass. If you're having conversations in English and you are not making any mistakes, you are failing.
That's a bold statement. If I'm speaking perfectly, I'm failing.
Yes. Because if you're making zero mistakes, it means you're staying entirely rigidly within your safe comfort zone. You're only using the basic grammatical structures and vocabulary you mastered 6 months ago. You aren't pushing into that 70% comprehensible input zone. You aren't attempting to express complex thoughts. Growth, true neurological growth and myelination only happens at the very edge of your capability.
All right.
The edge of your capability is inherently messy. It's full of errors, mispronunciations, and awkward phrasing. Every single mistake you make is a vital data point showing your brain exactly where the neural pathway needs more reinforcement.
The ultimate goal is human connection, not grammatical perfection. If you used the wrong verb tense, or if you completely butchered the pronunciation of a word but the person smiled and handed you the cup of coffee you asked for, the communication was a 100% complete success. Okay, we're nearing the end of our deep dive today, and we absolutely have to address the golden question. The question every single listener has in their mind right now as they look at this daily routine documentary schedule we've built.
The timeline. Everyone wants to know, when will I actually see results from all this strange out loud narrating?
Exactly. If our listener commits to this today, if they spend just 15 to 30 minutes a day doing the multiple expressions while brushing their teeth, anchoring emotions during their commute, and narrating their lunch, what is a scientifically realistic expectation?
The source lays out a very grounded, neurologically sound timeline based on that 15 to 30 minutes of daily, highly focused practice. Within the first 2 to 3 weeks, you will start experiencing what we call small wins.
What does a small win feel like neurologically?
It's a moment of delightful surprise. You might be walking down the street or watching a movie, and a specific English phrase will just pop into your conscious mind completely unprompted. You didn't consciously try to translate it. The English words just arrived fully formed. It's the very first biological sign that the direct neural pathway, the direct flight from New York to Boston, is successfully forming myelin.
I love those moments. It feels like the brain is finally cooperating after months of fighting you. And what about the 2-month mark?
By 2 months of consistent practice, those isolated moments of surprise become a predictable pattern. You will find yourself having increasingly frequent, highly direct English thoughts. During your designated routines, the out-loud narration will flow without the painful friction. You'll notice that the grueling 4-step translation process is actively deteriorating because your brain prefers the new, efficient route.
And the ultimate milestone, the 6-month mark.
After 6 months of relentless daily application of these specific strategies, a fundamental cognitive shift occurs. English begins to feel genuinely natural. It becomes an automatic process. You'll actually have moments where you are deep in a passionate conversation or engrossed in a movie, and you suddenly pause and realize you have completely forgotten that you're operating in a foreign language. The medium of the language disappears entirely, and your brain is just directly interacting with the meaning.
But this raises an important question. What happens when you inevitably hit a plateau? Because no one's learning progress is a perfect straight line pointing upward to infinity.
The plateaus. They're the absolute graveyard of language learners. You will hit periods, sometimes lasting weeks or even a month, where you feel like you're doing all the daily work, you're doing the documentary, but your English is not getting a single bit better. You feel permanently stuck in the mud.
It's the most frustrating feeling in the world. You want to just throw the books away and quit. But you must trust the biological process. When you feel plateaued and stagnant, your brain is not actually resting. It's quietly, desperately consolidating the massive amounts of data you've been feeding it. It's building deeper structural connections in the background. It's doing the invisible work. If you have the discipline to push through the emotional frustration of the plateau and maintain the schedule, you will inevitably experience a sudden, dramatic breakthrough where everything clicks into place overnight and you realize you have leveled up significantly.
Trust the invisible work. I love that. Okay, it's time to bring this all together. Today's deep dive was a mission to stop the exhausting cognitive tax of translating in your head. And your highly actionable takeaway is the daily routine documentary schedule.
Pick 3 simple, mundane daily routines.
Use mental substitution with the multiple expressions rule. Don't just say it once. Force your brain to find 3 distinct ways to say it. Build the web.
Cultivate a bilingual inner monologue to handle complex thoughts. And use the biological highlighter pen by anchoring the language to your genuine, raw emotions.
Feed your brain the right fuel with comprehensible input. Use a 70% sweet spot. Read obsessively about your hobbies to override the difficulty. Read ahead on the subtitles to prime your auditory cortex, and use the biology of sleep with spaced re-exposure.
And most importantly, you must output. Shadow native speakers to build speed, Record yourself to fix exactly 3 specific errors at a time, and narrate your life out loud like you're the star of your own documentary to build the spontaneous speaking muscle.
Use filler phrase bridges to survive the amygdala hijack, aggressively simplify your complex thoughts, and embrace the messy, necessary reality of making mistakes as data points.
This schedule is the literal biological blueprint for building the thick myelin pathways you need for a direct flight. Before we go today, we like to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We've spent the entire deep dive talking about language acquisition. We've talked about getting better at English, but I want you to zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture.
Think about the underlying neuroscientific principles we've explored in depth today. The concept of insulating a bare neural pathway through consistent, daily, low-pressure microactions. The power of spaced re-exposure to transfer data from temporary to permanent storage. The strategy of emotional anchoring to make information unforgettable. The 70% rule of finding the exact perfect zone of proximal development.
These aren't just neat little language hacks. These are the fundamental blueprints for how the human brain learns absolutely anything. So the provocative thought I want you to take with you today is this. What if you applied this exact same biological framework to the next massive challenge in your life?
What if you applied this 70% rule and spaced re-exposure to finally learning a complex coding language like Python? What if you used emotional anchoring and highly targeted solo output to master playing the piano?
What if you even applied the concept of identifying and intentionally reinforcing direct neural pathways to regulating your own emotional reactions during high-stress situations at work? If you can biologically hack your own brain to think instantaneously in a completely foreign language, what else are you capable of mastering if you just stop letting your brain take the lazy way around? The cellular machinery is already in your head. You just have to build the path. Start your documentary right now. Pick your 3 routines for tomorrow. You're doing great. Keep going.